So today I'm going to show you how to reproduce a hand or other body part. For this particular instance, I'm going to reproduce my left hand by making a mold using alginate, by Smooth On, which is over here, and then casting in that mold using hydrocal. So the first thing we need to do is we need some warm water. I've got about 1.5 liters here, and I'm going to use an equal amount of my alginate. So it's 1.5 liters of the alginate and 1.5 liters of the water. Now this alginate is good because it doesn't go up into the air. It's not a so you don't really need a respirator because you don't have to worry about breathing it in like you do with some compounds. So that's about 1.5 liters and 1.5 liters. So I'm going to put my alginate in here. Now, I'm using just a generic drink container, and the reason is I have large hands, and short of using a large bucket, I wanted something that fits my hand well. Now, you don't want too large a container. You want your container to be large enough for whatever you're reproducing, but you don't want it to be so large that you're wasting a bunch of materials. Materials aren't free, and so you want your container to be about this, just slightly larger than whatever body part you're reproducing. So I've got the alginate in there, so now I'm going to add the 1.5 liters of water. Now the alginate is pretty loose. It's not very dense at all. So even though you're doing a 1-to-1, you're going to come up, in the end, you're going to have substantially less. I may actually end up having to add more water. Now I'm going to mix this using a drill mixer. Now I've noticed that I need about twice as much as what I put in there. So I'm going to actually grab another 1.5 liters of water. So like I said, the alginate is not very dense. So what you'll find is that when you mix the alginate with the water, you end up with a much smaller volume total volume, and you may have to alter your original amounts, which isn't a big deal if you've planned ahead and made sure that you have enough to begin with. So I'm just going to mix it up in this bucket here. Now, there's about an 8-minute set time, so I'm not too worried. So there's not too much concern that I'll have it set up before I'm actually mixed up and ready. So I've mixed up some more alginate, and I'm just going to pour it in here. And this should give me just about the correct volume. Actually, I might as well just use my hand since I'm going to be sticking it in here anyway. Alright, so now my alginate's all mixed up. So I'm just going to stick my hand in, and I want it to be in just about the correct position. So I'm bending my fingers a little bit, but not too much, and I'm kind of spreading them out because I'm going to actually use this to make a reptilian glove. So I'm going to sculpt on it. So now I just have to wait about 8 minutes is how long it takes to harden. And then 10 minutes is the demold time for this particular compound. So I'm just going to keep it in here and try and keep it as still as I can. Trying to keep my fingertips away from any edges. It won't impact it too much, but you may, if you're against an edge, you may find that when you go to cast in your mold, that it leaks through that edge and you end up with a deformity. So I just try to keep it nice and in the middle. Now the other benefit of using this container is that I'm going to add enough of the gypsum, which is the hydrocal, to create a base for the hand. That way I have a nice weighted flat pedestal, so that while I'm working with the hand itself, I don't have to worry about it falling over, tipping. Now I can already feel it starting to harden. And as I said, I used hot water or warm water, and heat decreases the set time and makes it set more quickly. And so during the summer, they actually Smooth On recommends that you keep your powder in a cool area around 60 to 70 degrees. So I can feel this hardening up, and you can see when I move a little bit, you can see it flexing. I'm trying not to move too much. Obviously, if you have rings or watches or anything of that sort, you want to take those off before you make the mold, because they can deform, or you're going to mold that. Now, the alginate is great in that it comes off of everything. It doesn't ruin your clothes like silicone or some other substances. It won't get into your clothes and just stay there. Liquid latex and silicone are pretty bad about that. Alginate seems to come right out of clothing, and also hair. You know, I'm lucky in that I don't have a lot of hair to get caught. But even if you do, it's not really a huge issue. So if you look, you can see how it's getting much harder. It's not completely hardened yet. I'm just going to stay here for a few more minutes. If you remove your hand or foot or whatever you're casting or molding, if you remove whatever you're molding too quickly, your mold's not going to work. It won't be completely hardened, and you may have you may find that it collapses in on itself. So it's easier just to take an extra few minutes and sit there rather than destroy your whole mold because you got in a hurry. Like I said, the alginate, as far as expenses go, is not as expensive as some compounds, but it's still, you know, you don't want to waste it if you can help it. It feels kind of funny as it hardens because you can, you know, you go from a liquid state to almost like you put your hand in a thick sand or mud where you can move it a little bit, but not too much. just kind of feeling, trying to get an idea of whether it's fully hardened or not. Let's see what time is. All right. So I'm going to give it another couple of minutes just to make sure that it's definitely set. But the demold time is a couple of minutes after the set time. So just to play it safe, I'm going to wait. Now you can look, even with this little amount, it's hardening up in here. But for some reason, I think probably the small amounts don't harden as quickly because it cools off, whereas the large volume maintains its heat better and sets up more quickly. Now, a word on the drill mixers. These things are amazing. They are the best thing you can get if you want to mix paint, if you want to mix things like this alginate or other resins or other compounds. You know, you can sit there with a stir stick for an hour and not accomplish what you can accomplish with one of these in just a couple of minutes. So if you have $10 and you want to save yourself a lot of stress and time, get one of these stir adapters for your drill. Now they also sell them in different types. This is a screw type. They sell them in propeller types also, and a multitude of different sizes for different needs. So if you're mixing up concrete, you're obviously going to need a larger tip than you are for mixing up paint or this alginate. Alright, so I think it has pretty much set. So if you look, you can see it's fairly hard. There's no liquid at all. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start wiggling my fingers and my hand just to kind of try to loosen it up. I don't want to, you know, it's kind of a vacuum, so I don't want the vacuum when I pull it out to damage my mold. So I'm slowly just kind of trying to loosen all my digits so that when I pull it out, it doesn't collapse in. And you can kind of feel as it loosens up a little bit. So once it feels like every digit is loose and that there's some air replacing and making it in, so it's not creating a suction that'll collapse my mold, I'm just going to slowly pull my hand out, and there we go. As you can see, the mold is completed. Now, the next step is I've got my mold. I want to put something in here. So what I'm going to use is what's called white hydrocal. Now, hydrocal is available in a variety of sizes, usually in weights. What did I do with my water container? So what I usually do is I purchase a 50-pound container for my hydrocal, and it's really not that expensive. for the hydrocal itself, what you find is that you end up paying more for the shipping and handling than you do for the hydrocal itself. So now I'm putting in water. I'm gonna rinse it out a little bit. Now hydrocal is mixed 3 to 1. 1 part water to 3 parts hydrocal. So what I'm going to do is do about 16 ounces of water with a 3-part volume of hydrocal. So 16 ounces of water and 48 ounces of the hydrocal. Now, with hydrocal, I'm just going to show it to you. Since I use 50-pound bags, I keep it off to the side. So hydrocal is a white powder. I'm just going to put it in here. And I'm not going to use my drill mixer. I guess I could. I'm just going to use a screwdriver. You know, it's not great for your skin. It definitely dries it out and it gets really hot. But a lot of times with the hydrocal, I just end up I'll start mixing it up, and then I'll use my hands to break up any chunks. But since it is kind of irritating, I'm going to use a glove just to make sure, and just keep it off my skin. And so when you're done, depending on how much water you use, you'll end up with a bit of a paste or a little liquidy. And that is fine. And I'm just going to pour the hydrocal into my mold here. Now, like I said, I've made extra, and the reason is that I'm going to fill up the container, and I'm going to use the top I'm just going to give it a little shake. And the reason I'm doing this, and you might notice, is I'm trying to fill up any air pockets. I'm trying to fill up any air pockets with the hydrocal. And you probably can't see it, but there's bubbles coming up as I do this. So any air pockets are going to show up as big pits. So I want to have as few of those as possible. So I'm just giving it a shake, try and get out any air pockets and fill up all open areas with the hydrocal. Now, if you had a vibrating platform, that would be easier. But now I'm not getting any more air bubbles, which makes me think that I have most open areas filled. All right. So you can see that between the seam of the alginate and the plastic container, there's a little bit of seepage of the gypsum, the plaster. That's okay. That's normal. Won't affect anything. Now, if you had your finger off to the edge, you would probably see the same thing where your finger was, and then you would have like a little blossom from that area. But I think I've avoided that. So now all I do is I wait about 30 minutes. I want it to be kind of level. And it really doesn't take this plaster long to harden. Like I said, about 30 minutes. Then I'm going to come back once it hardens and try to release this cast from the mold itself. Now, the bad thing about alginate is it's a one-time deal. You're only going to get one casting from it. Unless, I guess if you use silicone, you might be able to get more from an alginate mold, but they're not very strong or durable. So usually you get one cast and that's it. All right. So I'm going to give this time to harden. Once it's back to room temperature, because the hydrocal is exothermic, so it creates heat as it hardens. So you'll know once it's completely hardened, because you'll be able to feel that it's back to room temperature. And then we'll try to release this casting and go from there. So it's been about an hour and a half. So now I want to try to release this mold. So the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of go on the sides here and make sure it's kind of loose. Now, I have found that the hardest thing with these is actually just getting these things to release. Mainly because it's hard to give it a little push. I don't want to So I'm trying to get some air in there because it creates a suction, and that suction is what keeps it from actually releasing. Now, I'm using a screwdriver to kind of try and get that suction in there. You have to be careful, otherwise you can end up cracking and breaking your mold. Obviously the easiest thing to have done would be to put a hole, but I want to reuse this. I'm going to tap it against the floor gently. Let's see if that'll release it a little bit. And it has. There we go. So now we've got the mold down. So I'm just going to split this open. I'm just going to give it a little slice here. I'm very gently just removing the alginate from the hand that I molded earlier. And then cast. So again, I used algisate from Smooth On to make the mold, and then I cast it in white hydrocal. And this is a pretty inexpensive route as far as making molds and casting them. You could definitely spend a lot more money using resins and silicone, but it all depends on what your final use is. And like I said, I'm going to use this to sculpt on. But there we go. We have our final molded hand. It's not too bad. There's a little, looks like a little air bubble here and over here that filled with some of the hydrocal, the gypsum. But we can take that off easy enough with just a little blade, maybe even my fingernail. Nah, it'll take a blade. But that's it. That's how you mold a body part using alginate and hydrocal. So I'm going to let this dry and really set up well before I actually start to do anything else with it. But that's it. All right. Until later, this is Dustin with NVO. You can find my masks, like this one that I'm in the midst of painting, and fossil replicas on Etsy. Thanks a lot. Bye.